Think for a moment. Why is it that the more intelligent someone becomes, the more they tend to withdraw? Why do those with the greatest minds often find solace, not in crowds, but in quiet isolation? Could it be that what we call social life is, for some, a disguised burden? What if solitude is not loneliness but liberation? In today's video, we're going to uncover one of the harshest truths ever spoken about human nature, a truth articulated by Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher known not for sugarcoating reality, but for slicing straight through it. This video is not for everyone. It's for those who feel a strange unease in social situations, who often feel like outsiders, who find more meaning in a silent room than in a noisy party. We're diving deep into why truly smart people often abandon social life, not because they are antisocial, but because they see it for what it really is. And stay with me until the end, because the final insight we'll explore may completely change the way you understand your own solitude. It's the most important revelation, and I promise, it's worth the wait. Before we dive in, take a moment to support this channel. If you're someone who values depth over superficiality, truth over comfort, and self-knowledge over social approval, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us, have you ever felt more yourself when you're alone? Your insights and stories might resonate deeply with others. Let's build a space for thinkers like you. Now, let's begin with Schopenhauer's first brutal observation. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that most of what we call socializing is at best distraction, and at worst, dilution of the self. According to him, the average person lives in constant noise. Not just literal noise, but mental noise, gossip, social comparison, trivial conversations, and endless social obligations. But the thinker, the person who actually stops to observe, to reflect, to see through things, that person quickly realizes that this noise is not nourishing, it's draining. Imagine for a moment you are an artist trying to paint a masterpiece. Every 5 minutes, someone walks into the room and demands your attention. Come to this event. Respond to this message. Did you hear what so-and-so said? How much of your vision would survive? How much of your clarity would remain? Schopenhauer wasn't just guessing. He was observing a pattern throughout history. The most profound thinkers, writers, scientists, and artists have often withdrawn from the world, not because they hate people, but because they need space to preserve their inner world. From Newton's reclusive brilliance to Kafka's melancholic isolation, from Nietzsche's solitude in the Alps to Emily Dickinson's silent sanctuary, solitude has always been the ground where genius grows. Why is that? Because being alone removes the need for masks. In social life, we constantly shape-shift, adapting our speech, our tone, our behavior to match those around us. It's rarely conscious, but it's always happening. We become fragments of ourselves, slipping into the expectations of others. But when you're alone, there's no need to play a role. You can just be. And for the intelligent person, whose inner world is often richer than the outer, this is not a loss, it's a return. Schopenhauer famously said, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." To the shallow mind, life is obvious, straightforward, and entertainment is enough. But to the deep mind, life is full of contradiction, suffering, beauty, and absurdity. These are not topics for small talk, and the frustration that comes with trying to discuss deep truths in a superficial world leads many to retreat. It's not misanthropy, it's exhaustion. You might ask, but isn't social connection essential to happiness? The answer is, it depends on the quality of the connection. Schopenhauer argued that most people are not seeking truth or meaning in others. They're seeking validation, distraction, and ego boosts. For the philosopher, this kind of interaction is hollow. He viewed solitude not as a lack, but as an enhancement. A man who possesses genius is like an eagle. He soars alone. And perhaps you felt it too. That moment when you're surrounded by people, yet feel completely alone. Not because you don't care about others, but because the conversation never touches the depths where your mind lives. In contrast, when you're alone with a book, or in nature, or deep in thought, you feel connected to something vast, eternal, meaningful. Here lies the paradox. Those who think deeply often feel more connected to the universe when they are not connected to society. This doesn't mean relationships are unimportant. But for the truly intelligent individual, relationships must be based on mutual growth, authenticity, and shared exploration of truth, not convenience or entertainment. That kind of connection is rare, and until it's found, solitude becomes the preferable companion. Let me ask you, when was the last time you had a conversation that made your soul feel seen? When was the last time you left a gathering feeling more whole, not more fragmented? Schopenhauer's honesty stings because it reflects something we all sense but rarely articulate. That much of our so-called social life is posturing, performance, distraction from self-awareness. And that's why smart people, truly self-aware individuals, begin to pull away, not to escape the world, but to understand it better, to understand themselves better. They are not rejecting humanity. They are returning to their own, and that return is sacred. If you've ever felt guilty for needing time alone, for declining invites, for not enjoying social media or group chatter, this is your permission to stop apologizing. It may just mean that your mind values something more, something deeper. As Schopenhauer saw it, solitude is not a retreat from life. It is a preparation for living it on your own terms, and we're just getting started. So if solitude is the sanctuary of the wise, what then is the function of social life in the world Schopenhauer saw so clearly? To understand this, we must look at how Schopenhauer perceived human nature at its core. He was not a romantic. He believed that at the root of all human activity lies the will to live, a blind, ceaseless, unconscious drive to survive, to propagate, and to dominate. According to him, this primal force shapes not only our biological instincts, but also our behaviors, relationships, and societies. Social life, then, is not always a place of connection and harmony, but often a disguised battleground for ego, status, and validation. For the average person, socializing is survival. It's where one builds alliances, signals worth, finds a mate, or asserts control. For Schopenhauer, this dance of egos, though necessary for many, was a distraction for the thinker. He believed that those who rise above base instinct, who question the nature of reality and meaning itself, would inevitably find themselves alienated from these games. It's not that they see themselves as better, but as disinterested, detached, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too deeply. Imagine standing in a crowd where everyone is speaking in a language you barely recognize. The words don't carry meaning, the gestures feel rehearsed. You observe, politely nod, but feel as though you're watching a play where the actors forgot you weren't part of the script. That's how the intelligent individual often feels in common social settings, not out of arrogance, but because of an incompatibility between depth and surface. This discomfort grows with awareness. As one's self-knowledge increases, the tolerance for inauthenticity decreases. The clever learn how to blend in, but the truly wise often choose not to. They disengage not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of preservation. Schopenhauer even went so far as to say, the more a man has in himself, the less he will want from other people. When your internal world is rich, filled with ideas, questions, passions, creativity, then the superficial becomes unbearable. You no longer seek company to fill a void. You seek solitude to protect your mind. This is why so many intelligent individuals are drawn to philosophy, music, literature, and art, not merely as hobbies, but as lifelines. These pursuits allow the soul to express itself authentically, without interruption or dilution. But make no mistake, this path is not always easy. Solitude, for the thinking mind, is nourishment. But for the world around them, it often looks like withdrawal, coldness, or arrogance. Friends may ask, why don't you come out more? Family may worry, are you okay? Society may label it as antisocial, but the truth is, the intelligent person may be healthier, more centered, more alive in their solitude than most are in their social rituals. Let's not forget, Schopenhauer himself led a largely solitary life. He found human company exhausting and filled his days with books, long walks, writing, and reflection. His pessimism wasn't born out of bitterness, but out of clarity. He saw how much suffering is woven into the human condition, and he understood that to see clearly is at times to grieve deeply. Because once you see through the illusions, the small talk, the shallow motivations, the performative nature of much of modern interaction, it's hard to go back. You begin to crave truth, honesty, silence, not because you're broken, but because you're awakening. Let's pause here and reflect. How much of your time is spent around people who see you, not just your face, your job, your title, but your soul? How often do you feel you can speak your truth without needing to translate it for others to understand? And if your answer is rarely, then perhaps your solitude is not a flaw. It's a sign of inner alignment. This is why Schopenhauer believed that solitude is the domain of the exceptional. He didn't mean exceptional in terms of social success or intellect alone, but in terms of inner independence. Those who are emotionally self-sufficient, spiritually curious, and mentally awakened, those people can endure and even enjoy being alone, because they are not empty, they are full, and therefore, they do not need constant connection to feel real. But let's be clear, solitude is not the same as isolation. Schopenhauer was not advocating for nihilism or misanthropy. He was calling for a deeper, more meaningful engagement with life, one that begins with the self. In his view, the only way to truly understand the world is to step outside of its noise. And here lies the painful irony. The smarter you become, the lonelier the path may feel. The more self-aware you are, the fewer people you can genuinely relate to. But at the same time, the more aligned you become with your true nature, the freer you are from the expectations of others. It's a paradox. Less connection, but more meaning. Fewer people, but deeper peace. And in this paradox, Schopenhauer found something resembling wisdom. He did not see solitude as emptiness, but as space. Space for the soul to breathe, for the mind to think, for the spirit to expand. He saw the abandonment of social life not as a tragedy, but as a turning inward, toward a life of self-mastery and philosophical clarity. Ask yourself, what have you learned in your quietest moments? Who have you become when no one was watching? Would you trade that depth for shallow companionship? Would you trade self-knowledge for social approval? Most people would, but maybe you wouldn't. And maybe that's why you're here, because you're not looking for noise, you're looking for truth. And Schopenhauer, he would say that's exactly why you don't fit in. Let's go even deeper. Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy didn't merely describe why intelligent people abandon social life, he also explained what they discover in that abandonment. Because, according to him, solitude is not a passive state, it is active liberation. It is in solitude that we are able to peel away the layers of illusion that society so persistently drapes over us. To Schopenhauer, one of the greatest illusions of social life is the belief that others can complete us, that happiness is something to be found in others' approval, their praise, their company. He called this the folly of dependence, and he argued that it leads most people into cycles of disappointment, insecurity, and self-betrayal. The wise, in contrast, stop looking outside for what can only be cultivated within. He wrote, "All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. The same could be said of solitude. First, it is mocked. Then, it is feared. But eventually, when understood, it becomes obvious, essential, necessary." Let's consider how this unfolds in real life. The young, intelligent person often starts their journey feeling misplaced. As a child, they may have been introverted, observant, or sensitive, not easily swept up in games of popularity or trends. Instead of seeking constant stimulation, they're drawn to quiet curiosity, deep thinking, and often find themselves lost in their own imagination. As they grow, this difference becomes more pronounced. School becomes tedious, small talk becomes painful, and peer groups seem to orbit around things that feel hollow. The pressure to conform is intense. So many gifted minds are taught to suppress their depth to fit in, but eventually some stop trying, and that's when the turning point begins. They stop attending events out of obligation. They no longer fake interest in things that bore them. They decline invitations that drain them, and instead, they retreat, not into despair, but into themselves. This retreat allows something rare to happen, a confrontation with the self. In solitude, there's no one to impress, no audience to perform for, just silence. And in that silence, we begin to see who we really are. Our fears, our dreams, our weaknesses, our gifts. This can be terrifying, which is why so many run from it. But for the intelligent soul, it is the first step to inner mastery. This process mirrors the journey of many great thinkers. Take Friedrich Nietzsche, who saw solitude not as a punishment, but as a sacred responsibility. He wrote, The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. Solitude for him was the price of truth, and truth, for both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, was the highest pursuit. But solitude does more than reveal the self. It also reveals the world in ways society cannot. When you step back from social noise, you begin to observe rather than participate. You start seeing patterns in behavior, in politics, in culture, and more importantly, you begin to question them. Why do we crave approval? Why are people terrified of silence? Why is distraction celebrated and stillness condemned? These questions don't arise in the crowd. They arise in stillness. And the more you ask, the more you begin to see not just the surface of things, but their essence. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said, "The greatest of follies is to sacrifice health for any other kind of happiness." He wasn't just speaking of physical health, he was speaking of mental health, the inner stillness, the psychological clarity, the spiritual wholeness that only solitude can protect. And every time we sacrifice that by forcing ourselves into social rituals that don't align with us, we drain our life force. But this truth also comes with a heavy burden, because once you've tasted that solitude, once you've seen the world through awakened eyes, you can never unsee it. The disconnection grows not because you hate the world, but because you finally understand it. And that understanding brings pain. You start to see how people lie to themselves just to feel accepted. You notice how often conversation is just noise meant to fill the fear of silence. You see how many relationships are built not on love or truth, but on mutual distraction. And this realization is both sobering and freeing. You no longer crave what you once did. You no longer chase approval or cling to validation. You become sovereign, whole. And this, Schopenhauer believed, is the true reward of solitude. Not just peace, but power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. Ask yourself now, honestly, when do you feel most alive? Is it when you're performing for others or when you're lost in a moment of silent presence? When your attention is fragmented in conversation or when it's locked in deep contemplation? The truth is, some people are not built for constant interaction. They are built for insight. They are not here to entertain or be entertained. They are here to observe, understand, create. Their nature is not social. It is spiritual, intellectual, existential. And the tragedy is that many never realize this. They spend years trying to fix their need for solitude, thinking it's a flaw. But what if it's not? What if it's your calling? What if solitude is the environment your soul needs to blossom? Schopenhauer believed that only in solitude can we become who we truly are. Everything else is compromise. This is why he wrote so often of the thinker's loneliness, not to celebrate suffering, but to highlight its necessity. You do not become wise by always being surrounded. You become wise by having the courage to be with yourself, to confront your doubts, to wrestle with truth, to endure the silence until it speaks. And if you are on that path, if you've ever felt that solitude calls you louder than the crowd, then understand this: you are not broken, you are becoming. And the final piece of this truth, the one that will transform everything, is still to come. So here we are. We've seen why solitude is not simply an escape, but a deliberate path. We've uncovered how intelligent individuals like Schopenhauer often reject social life, not in arrogance, but in pursuit of something far more profound. But what then is the ultimate truth? What is the final insight that makes this entire journey not only bearable, but necessary? It's this: the highest form of self-realization can only occur in solitude, not amidst applause, not in conversation, not even in love, but in the still raw presence of one's own mind, stripped of external noise. In this solitude, there is no one to deceive, no mask to wear, no stage to stand on. There is only you, and that is where the real work begins. This truth is uncomfortable. Most people resist it their entire lives, because being alone means seeing what you've ignored, feeling what you've suppressed, hearing the thoughts you've drowned in distractions. But for those who are brave enough, and make no mistake, it is an act of courage, solitude becomes the doorway to enlightenment. Let's go back to Schopenhauer one last time. He believed that the world was fundamentally driven by blind will, that suffering was baked into existence. But he also believed that through detachment, through art, through philosophy, through solitude, we could transcend that suffering. We could, if only for moments, step outside of the cycle. And here's the final twist. For Schopenhauer, solitude was not just a refuge, it was a form of spiritual rebellion. To be alone, to not need constant validation, to create for the sake of creating, to think for the sake of truth. This, in a world of endless distraction and conformity, is an act of defiance. The intelligent person who embraces solitude is not retreating from life. They are elevating it. They are choosing meaning over comfort, clarity over popularity, freedom over belonging. And once you make this choice, the world will try to pull you back in. It will tempt you with noise, with applause, with false promises of connection. But you will know the difference, because you've tasted the silence that nourishes. You've stood in the stillness that does not demand, but simply is. Now, let's turn inward one last time. Ask yourself, what have I discovered in my solitude? Have I become clearer about who I am, about what I value, about what I refuse to tolerate? If the answer is yes, even partially, then know this: you are walking the path that Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Jung, and countless other profound minds walked before you. You are reclaiming your inner life, and that is the greatest act of personal power. But solitude does more than sharpen the mind. It opens the heart to the universe, to the eternal, to the divine. When you step out of the crowd and into the silence, something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear what is real, not what is trending, not what is expected, but what is true. You begin to understand that life is not about accumulation, but realization. Not about how many friends you have, but how fully you know yourself. You stop comparing, competing, pretending. You become simple, whole, grounded. And it is from this place of self-possession and clarity that you can finally re-enter the world on your own terms. Not to be consumed by it, but to contribute to it. Not to belong to it, but to influence it. Because now you are no longer seeking from the world. You are giving to it, from your overflow, from your wisdom, from your solitude. And that is the final paradox. The more you embrace your solitude, the more powerful your presence becomes when you return. You no longer speak just to speak. You speak with purpose. You no longer connect out of fear. You connect out of abundance. You are no longer a passenger in society. You are the author of your life. This is the journey of the intelligent soul. And yes, it is lonely, but it is the sacred loneliness of the mountain climber, the poet, the sage. It is the solitude of those who refuse to live a half-life, of those who would rather face the silence than lose their soul in the noise. If you are one of them, if solitude feels more like home than any crowd, then know this: you are not alone. You are part of a hidden lineage, a quiet brotherhood, a silent sisterhood. From Schopenhauer to you, the path of the awakened is narrow, but it is yours to walk. Walk it with your head held high. And when the world asks, why don't you show up more? Smile gently and answer with the calm certainty of one who knows, because I already found what you're still searching for. If this video resonated with you, take a moment now, not for us but for others who are walking this path, to leave a comment. Share your story. Let others know they are not crazy, not broken, not antisocial, but awakening. Like, subscribe, share it with someone you know is quietly carrying this truth within them. Together, we are creating a space where thoughtfulness is not an exception, but a standard. And remember, solitude is not your weakness. It is your strength. It is not your burden. It is your gift, and in that sacred silence, everything begins. Thanks for looking.